without a star. Free, only want to be free. We huddle close, hang on to a dream. On the boats and on the planes, they're coming to America, never looking back again. They're coming to America. Home don't seem so far away. Oh my God!
Well done.
Oh,
well done.
I thought you'd love it. I thought you loved my.
That's a good one. I have to apologize, Darius, because I just do not have the dance moves my 4-year-old has. But that was well done.
You know, it's tough. It's tough being me. Oh man, Jered, welcome to the Greatness Machine. How are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Darius. I appreciate it.
Oh, I'm so pumped you're here. So, guys, we're gonna get started. Guys, welcome to the Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and boy, do we have a special guest today, and my friend Jered Ede. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Thank you very much, Darius. It's a pleasure.
Oh, well, so the pleasure is all mine, actually. So I'm going to take that from you. Guys, before we get started, though, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. First of all, we are the Greatness Machine, and we are all about people who are living their passions to create greatness in the world. And today is a very special episode in that this is a controversial episode. We're going to chop up. Yes, Jered is the most controversial man I know. That's actually half joking, but yeah, you're like a controversial square, you know, you're buttoned up, man. You're an attorney, so all my attorney friends for the most part are pretty buttoned up. But what you're doing with Project Veritas, you guys are doing some interesting things, and we'll dive into that. But like I said, you guys, the format of the show is simple. We are live streaming though, so we're live. Start a watch party. Ask us questions. I have my team on standby. They'll be shooting questions my way. And with that said, you know. I'm so happy to have you here. I was like, first of all, you guys moved to New York. So Jered is married to my sister's best friend from childhood. And I literally, like, you don't know this about your wife, but I'm 6 years older than my sister, and Heather, is my sister's best friend from childhood. And so I was probably, dude, like 19 or 20. And my dad's like, you should marry Heather. like Jered's got a beautiful wife, and she was very mature for her age when she was 13. She probably looks the same now as she did when she was 13 years old.
Pretty much better.
Literally, like, no exaggeration. She was like 13 going on 25 or 30. And like,
the woman does not age.
No, it's kind of like, does she drink vampire blood? Are we going to go there? Are we going to talk
possible.
about?
It is possible.
Is there adrenochrome happening in your household? I hope not.
I'll just have to say, you know, in a lot of relationships, we're taught in law school, you know, you're supposed to sign a prenup beforehand. My wife, she made me sign an NDA saying I wouldn't disclose her beauty secrets. So here we are.
Nice. Okay, so I'll ixnay on the adrenochrome A. But guys, so you guys, I don't know, it was a few, I guess a couple months ago at most it was, I saw this email come across or a post on Facebook that said, we're moving to New York. They just moved to New York from California. You guys have been in California for a long time. And it's my husband got his dream job. So I was like, it didn't say the job. And so now here's a little more background. So Jered and I knew each other professionally too, because we're both working in the mortgage industry. And I just left the mortgage industry somewhat. I stepped down as CEO of the Money Source. And Jered's working for this high profile law firm in California that handles a lot of mortgage servicing. So we're kind of like rubbing elbows, and I think I was even a client. I was a client, or you guys were a client of mine,
That's
right?
Correct.
No,
yep.
I was a client of yours, right? So my company actually used your guys' services. So we kind of had this mortgage thing where we'd see each other and we'd kind of BS about mortgages and talk about life a little bit. And so anyhow,
we have riveting conversations about interest rates.
Oh my God. If you really want to chop it up with Jered, let's talk about mortgage servicing. Nothing like remittances.
Yes.
So, oh yeah. Oh, so spicy. So then I see this thing come across, then I don't remember when it was, but like I think Lawden sends me a text. She's like, "This is Jered's new company, and it's Project Veritas." So I'm like, "Oh, that name sounds familiar." So Jered is the chief legal officer of Project Veritas, and you guys are basically doing undercover journalism, right?
That's right.
And so that's, I think, a very bland way of describing what you guys are doing. But
Yes.
yeah, but obviously you've been an attorney for 10 years. You worked your way up through business litigation, a business attorney into mortgage servicing, and then boom, pull a full, like, I mean, I don't know if it's a 180, a 90, what it is, but going from, I got to say, in the legal world, going from a mortgage servicing, law firm to Project Veritas chief legal officers, pretty wide spectrum of change, right?
It's a pretty drastic change, to say the least. Yes.
So tell us a little bit about that's a life change, and you moved you moved your family from California, where we were joking about this before the show that his Southern California wife is now in New York, right? So you moved your family across the nation, took a full 180 in your career, and now you're a chief legal officer of an undercover journalism organization that's looking to expose the wrongs of the world, right? That's what
Correct.
I would assume that's what undercover journalists do. So tell us a little bit about that, because that's a pretty interesting thing to do.
Yeah. So undercover journalism obviously has a very long and prosperous history in the United States. We've got a very proud history of it here. And Project Veritas is proud to be carrying on that mantle, today. I think that the goal being, of course, when it comes to undercover journalism, is exposing those things that, to be completely frank, those in power do not want to come to light. And that's an important mission that, for the most part, a large portion of the media has simply abandoned. Investigative journalism is for the last probably 10, 15 years taken a serious nosedive as a result, in part, of some of those organizations just not simply being willing to take those risks. And taking risks is, speaking of, sorry to do a little book plug here, but I got a great book right here.
Yes.
So speaking of core values, one of Project Veritas's core values is that we're the tip of the spear. We're not afraid of litigation. We're not afraid of taking on those risks. And that was one of the things that attracted me here, is being able to take some risks. In my career as a lawyer, I made a name for myself in the litigation that I did, in part because I was willing to do things that nobody else had tried before. I was willing to try out new legal theories, try out new arguments, try out new strategies that no one has ever tried before. And I was rather successful at it as well. And when this opportunity came up to join Project Veritas, and engage in some new legal strategies themselves, it was, again, another risk that I was going, I can't shy away from this. I have to jump in both feet, and it's been an exciting roller coaster ever since. It's good stuff.
That's cool, man. So I know a lot of people who are just hardcore social justice warrior, bleeding heart. My mom's a bleeding heart liberal. She calls herself that. Like, literally, like, she said it to me the other day. She's like, "You know me, I'm a bleeding heart liberal." I'm like, "Yeah, Mom, you are." And I actually get into kind of debates with her a lot, because I'm like, "Look, like, I'm a pretty firm believer that the extremes of the political spectrum, I don't doubt that there's truth baked into some of their ideas, but I actually think that most people don't agree with them. I actually think a majority of the American population want the same thing, and the disagreements about how we're going to get there, and then the two extremes get to, excuse my language, but fucking own the mic, right?
Yeah.
And so and we all have to sit here and like listen to this bullshit. And so because I don't think that's what most people want. I don't think I think we all want the same thing. We want happiness in our lives. We want peace. We want prosperity. We want a well-functioning government. We want truth, right? And speaking of truth, Veritas obviously is Latin word for truth, right?
Yep.
But the issue that I've had, and this is the issue that I've struggled with, is that the extremes have taken over the mic, and now that becomes the narrative, right? We have these two competing narratives, whether we're talking about our president's narrative, whether we're talking about the Black Lives Matters narrative, and I don't want to make this a political conversation, but a lot of the stuff you guys do is around basically supporting a narrative, right? Or the truth that you believe supports that narrative, right? And so what I wanted to kind of dive into is, and I will say this, when I saw the name of the company, when I found out you were working with Project Veritas, I'm like, that name sounds familiar. I don't know why it sounds familiar, but and then I Googled it, and then I started reading about a lot of the work that the CEO, James O'Keefe, that's your CEO, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, so I started reading about a bunch of stuff he was doing back in like 2009 and 2008. And obviously my takeaway from that was, I was like, okay, this is a very, very, one would consider conservative group that's trying to expose the wrongs of the left, right? And that's me totally generalizing. Like,
right.
What are your thoughts on that? Like when I say that?
Well, I would point people to, number one, as an initial matter, that Project Veritas is not a partisan organization. And certainly there's a large number of our investigations that tend to reveal things about, what you would consider to be left-leaning causes or left-leaning organizations, if you will. But I would also point people to, for example, the release that just came out late last week, another release that we did today. So this Project Veritas story that literally just came out this morning, we went up and got on tape, on camera, someone had a voter in New Hampshire had admitted to a Project Veritas journalist that he voted twice using a fake ID, basically. And that whole case of that person voting twice, which is a felony in New Hampshire, had been sitting on the Attorney General's desk for well over 8 months. The Attorney General of New Hampshire is a Republican. And we took him to task. We met with him. James O'Keefe sat in the office of the Attorney General and asked, why has this not been prosecuted? Why is it that this has been sitting on your desk for nearly a year when you have an admission on tape and you have all the evidence you need on a silver platter, if you will? And the response or the result of that investigation by Project Veritas was twofold. And this was, groundbreaking pretty much from number one for any news organization, let alone for Project Veritas, which was number one, the Attorney General, literally the day after James O'Keefe and Project Veritas met with the Attorney General, arrested the voter and is now going to be charging the voter, and has expressly said in the New Hampshire Union Leader that the arrest was a result of Project Veritas's investigation. Number two, is the Republican Attorney General, Attorney General McDonald, actually spoke with James O'Keefe and said, well, listen, we fell down on this one. We clearly did not do our job. And that kind of investigation has the tendency in organizations like this, like the Attorney General in New Hampshire, to spark reforms. And that's exactly what's happening in New Hampshire. The Attorney General in New Hampshire is now taking steps and reforms to ensure that this kind of situation doesn't happen again, that when you have a clear-cut case of voter fraud, that it doesn't go unaddressed, so that people can have confidence in the elections. And that's incredibly important work, especially as we lead up to November. So I guess, just coming back to your question, I would say, look at what we did this week. It was very much taking a Republican to task.
And I think that's really important, especially like if we're going to if we're gonna plug my book, which we should a lot, as much as we can. Yeah. If we're gonna do that, then it's all around, I don't care if people want to support whatever cause it is that they want to support. I want people to just say what they are and be what they are, right? If you're saying that we're all around truth, then truth doesn't have an opinion around the political spectrum. The truth is the truth, whether you're going to the left or the right.
Correct.
So, what I guess that's and so I appreciate what you just said, which is that we're nonpartisan, right? So being nonpartisan would mean, from my own, layman brain, is that, okay, well, I'm going to go expose the wrongs of the left and the right because they're all doing the same. In my opinion, they're equally, they're the same amount, I guess, concentration of wrongness probably happening on the spectrum. If you just look at the law of averages, right? Law of averages says that, people are going to be doing these things that need to get exposed across the spectrum, whether it's in the middle, the right, the left, 10 degrees to the right, 10 degrees to the left, 50 degrees to the right, 50 degrees to the left. We should expect, just based off of the law of averages, unless you have I don't know, hardcore, like Kim Jong-un is your leader, and then yeah, maybe he's going to be predominantly doing a lot more of that stuff, right? So
exactly.
But we live in a democracy where we get to fight it out every day, right? And so with that said, when I looked at, and this is me, I'm telling you, I'm claiming ignorance right now, which I apologize for this. When I looked at just quickly at the projects I saw that you guys were working on, it did feel to me that most of them were exposing the wrongs of the left. And so when you look at your guys', I guess, portfolio of things you've uncovered, has it been with this idea of exposing the wrongs of one side versus the other? Because that, I would say that's partisan, right? And then the question, and my next question is fine, if you're nonpartisan, well, what percentage of these wrongs are you guys uncovering on the right versus the left? Is there is it 50-50? Because it didn't feel that way when I looked at it.
Yeah, and so, I think number one thing that I would say is this. We are obviously an organization that runs based off of information that leads us down a path of here's where we should be investigating. And it's things such as, for example, a suspicion that this particular person is doing this thing that would be illegal or would be wrongful, corruption, waste, abuse, fraud, right? And I would say the number one message that I would drive home to people who say that we are partisan is this: make us unpartisan. By which I mean, we thrive on tips. If you believe a Republican or conservative cause is engaging in corruption, waste, fraud, or abuse, then by all means, go to projectveritas.com, click on submit a tip, email us at veritastips at protonmail.com, veritastips@protonmail.com, and help us get there. We're a small organization. We do not have the budget of CNN to go after each and every single situation that might possibly have some corruption, waste, fraud, abuse, et cetera, that might be newsworthy, if you will. So we do have to be somewhat select about where we go and what we're investigating. The truth is what the truth is, and the investigations are, unbiased in that regard, where we are simply just going where the investigation leads us. And oftentimes we are investigating tips or ideas about, somebody who might be engaging in these wrongful activities that turns out there's nothing wrongful there. Okay, fantastic. There's not a story there. It's we move on to the next story. And that's all there is to it, So I would encourage people, when it comes to, looking at Project Veritas and saying, gee, well, there is some bias there, come join our fight for truth and help. If you think there's waste, fraud, and abuse on the other side, by all means, please tell us where to be looking. It's helpful.
So yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think that's an important part of if you're gonna say you're all about the truth, then obviously then people need to expect that you guys are going to do the things that would reveal the truth, right? And that's if people are going to live by their core values, right? And for me, it's like I always say, core values don't need to be nice, right? Like we don't need to be nice in our core values. That's one of the subchapters of my book, because people a lot of times say what they think people want to hear. And when I hear the word truth, I'm like, all right, man, I want to see exposure on both sides of the aisle, because I know they're both pulling bullshit. I know it. There's no way they're not. And so this is the argument I get with my mom. Mom, sorry, we're talking about you.
Your mom's a wonderful person, by the way. Hi, Darius's mom.
Yeah, I know. Jered and my mom, they're bros. No, my mom is a wonderful person, but I will say this to my mom. I'll say, Mom, you sound just like, my mom's like as anti-Trump as you can get. And I'm not a big lover of Trump, but like anyone that watches the show knows that. And it actually doesn't have to do with anything, except that I think we have different opinions about what values, like our core values are different, right? Yeah. And so he lives his core values. That guy, hey, anyone that says that Trump does not, he wears his core values on his sleeve. Like that guy,
he really takes the whole idea of core values don't have to be nice to an extreme. I will say that, though.
That guy is full like I wish every politician lived their core values the way he lives his. I think we'd be a better country. I just don't like his core values personally. I don't like the way he leads. And so I'm like, I like a lot of the stuff he did with China. And you could go from a political standpoint around policy. There's stuff that I don't agree with, but there's stuff I do agree with. I just don't like him as a leader because of my belief in how you need to lead, right? I believe what you say matters. I believe you can't have a casual relationship with the truth. Like, these are issues I have with our president, which is, we're talking about Veritas here, right? Truth. And so, dude, if you're a company that is all about the truth and you guys are all about exposing it, then yeah, my belief is I want to see people on both sides of the aisle feeding you guys stories so you could come out with it. What I don't like is, and this is a question for you, if I say, okay, that you guys are all about the truth, and this is I'm a layman, I'm a dumb person, I don't know anything about anything except what I see on Facebook, right? I'm being facetious here. So I hear that my buddy Jered just left to go join this group, and then I read that it's right-wing activist organization, Koch brothers are funding you guys through some like hidden trust, like. And those guys have an agenda, right? They're like the George Soros of the right, right? At least if you ask the left, that's what they'll say. And so when you see that, like Darius being layman, Darius is like, that seems like a political organization to me. So how do you respond to that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I would say this, if you think about it from the standpoint of, Noam Chomsky, when he came out with his book, Manufacturing Consent, he was talking about the fact that these underlying funders of news organizations have a huge amount of control over what information is fed to the public.
Right.
And so, to a certain extent, I understand, the concern that, donors and who our donors may be, and effectively who funds Project Veritas, may as a result have some impact on what the outcome of Project Veritas is. The reality is Project Veritas is perhaps by virtue of these donations, one of the most independent news organizations that exists. We have no boss, if you will. The boss is the truth. So our donors, for example, do not dictate to us what we investigate, where we investigate, who we investigate, what stories we publish, or what we go after. We are not a, for hire organization, if you will. The decisions about, who to investigate, what to investigate, and what really is newsworthy and therefore needs to be published, they are made without donor input. Now, our donors are obviously an incredible and important part of our organization because we can't do anything we do without our donors. We can't keep the lights on without our donors. But it's a chicken and an egg kind of situation, right? In this particular case with Project Veritas, the work is what drives the donations, not the donations driving the work. So that's the model that we have here, and it's very, very strict all the way from the for lack of a better term, the low man on the totem pole, all the way up to James O'Keefe. It's a very regimented program with that.
So right, so using that makes sense, right? Like, we're talking about essentially a nonprofit. You guys got to get funding to keep running. So the work is what dictates the donations, because there's a certain amount of work that's exposing the truth around whatever's happening in the world. And if I go that direction and say, okay, well, let's say you guys are like, man, we don't think that there's been enough, let's say I start giving you a ton of tips on the right that starts undermining the political initiatives of those donors. I got to assume they're going to be like, hey man, I'm not giving you any more money. Like, and so that just logically makes sense, right? If I have a bias, right? If I'm billionaire Darius, which hopefully will happen one day, but when billionaire, yes,
yes,
I'm billionaire Darius.
We're on our way here.
One book down, a billion plus to go.
That's right.
So if I'm billionaire Darius and I'm like, man, excuse me, I fucking hate the left. I just fucking, they're undermining American values. I can't say what I want to say anymore. That's cancel culture. I just hate those people that they've been hijacked by the far left. We got AOC and her communism. This is undermining capitalism. This is everything that's wrong in this country. I can't even support the police anymore. Fuck them, right? And by the way, I actually don't believe any of that stuff. But let's just say I felt that way. And I'm like, dude, there's these guys over here undercovering stuff. I'm going to give them $10 million. And then they start uncovering tons of stuff that I do support. I'm like, I'm not going to give you any more money. I mean, what the hell are you doing? I want you to go show me that AOC did something fucked up. I want to see that, so I have a hard time. I guess I don't want to say believing, but I kind of do have a hard time believing that if your donors are these like rich billionaires that hate a certain thing that's happening in the country, that you're incentivized. I always say to everybody, so if you want to change what's happening in our country, change the incentive systems, right? If you are financially incentivized to do something, you're going to do what supports that financial incentive, as long as your values are aligned with it, right? Mm-hmm. So if I say, okay, you guys have, and I don't know what anyone's political beliefs are there, but let's just say that you guys do have a political leaning. So now your values are aligned with the project you're working on. And the donor's like the super hardcore right-wing person. Let's just talk about this from a business perspective. Your differentiating value prop is that you could go expose the left all day long, because dude, there's not a lot of people trying to expose the left, right? There's a ton of people trying to expose the right in this country because the media is owned by the left, more or less, right? The mainstream media is left-leaning. So there's no shortage of people trying to uncover things that our president's doing wrong to a point where it's annoying. It's like, yeah, he wore his pants backwards. It's not that he's trying to bring back crisscross, you know? So when I see that, it's like, if I'm in your shoes, I'm just speaking honestly, man. If I was in your shoes, I'd be like, hey, what thing on the left can we go expose? Because we get way more bang for our buck on that. I get more donations. I get more, supporters. There's less of that happening in the mainstream media. So it's a less crowded market from a competition standpoint. So I have a tough time believing that you would be incentivized to go and expose the right, unless it was a low-hanging fruit. Maybe it was more moderate. Like, look, voter fraud's moderate, right? Like no one on the left's like, we should have voter fraud. Yeah, let's do it, right? And no one on the right saying that. It's more of a moderate stance that no one's going to disagree with that. No one's going to say, yeah, I don't think we should, capture kids, right? Everyone's going to agree it's a bad thing.
And I would generally disagree, or I mean, agree with you on that. But I guess here's where I would slightly disagree, which is, even, taking the example of voter fraud as an example. While you're right that it should be a moderate and bipartisan issue that transcends politics, and it's certainly something that we love doing issues where it transcends politics like that, and that's really one of the goals here. The problem is that even the reactions, for example, to the story that were done, when you can almost predict based upon the reactions which party a person is from, based upon how they're reacting to it. The people that are going, oh my goodness, this is, thanks for doing this. This is great. This is tremendous work. We're reforming the New Hampshire's Attorney General office. They tend to be the people that have been following us for a long time, whereas the people who are critical of this story tend to be, very critical of us across the board. And it's not that they're saying, gee, voter fraud's a good thing, let's go have voter fraud, so much as they're looking at it and going, well, voter fraud just doesn't exist, despite the evidence that it does. And so I think, to a certain extent, when you're looking at, for example, going back to the question of, well, okay, let's say, the most conservative donor in the world funding an organization like this, when we start going and attacking, if you will, the truth from the conservative standpoint, why would they continue to, fund us? The reality is that what we have found is our donors have a great interest, not in pursuing the truth of one side or the other side, but great interest in just pursuing the truth, period, and an openness to hearing what that is, whether that be from, the partisan standpoint of saying, let's clean our own house, or the nonpartisan way of saying this should be an issue that transcends politics, let's pursue it, or, that they're actually pleased with the outcome that we achieved. We've had some of our most successful stories have been when we've investigated, conservative politicians or conservative organizations that have not been doing well, and, have resulted in some change, including a Trump-backed candidate in Florida during the last election. So, it is very much we go where the truth leads us, and we want to make sure that the politicians are telling people the truth, that they're not simply saying one thing to get elected and then doing another thing. Same with organizations. If you're going to put yourself out there, as you say, to say, hey, this is who we are as an organization on the national field, but we find out behind the scenes that you're doing something completely different, that's a problem. That's a newsworthy goal, for, if you will. So yeah, I think when we talk about what our donors' goals are, if you will, where they align with us, is the pursuit of truth, whether that be cleaning up their own house if they're conservative, which, by the way, A lot of our donors are not conservative. In fact, we just did a story, about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, maybe 3 weeks ago, where we're filing a lawsuit in Oregon to actually challenge one of Oregon's laws that effectively bans undercover journalism. And we go out onto the streets of Portland, and James O'Keefe is walking around just talking to people on the street. And one of the first people to shake James O'Keefe's hands and say, "Hey, thanks for doing what you're doing," was a Black Lives Matter activist who's, protesting in the streets for left causes, but believes in the truth. And that's, ultimately the connecting goal here with everyone, even amongst our staff, in terms of political leanings. We've got both sides of the aisle here. The connecting, tendon, if you will, is the truth. And where does it lead us? And what can we expose that, as you put it, in terms of the competition, side of things, what isn't currently being exposed by the media? We're not here to add noise to something that's already going on. We're here to, go where no one else is going. Sorry, that was a Star Trek reference.
Yeah. I would try to do like, what's the thing where
oh yeah, there you go.
So I have to say, my finger in their web.
It's terrible because I can do it, but I never was actually a Star Trekkie. My big brother, he was a big Star Trek fan. I never got into it, and but nonetheless, I can do things like this that convince people I'm a bigger nerd than I actually am. But
that you got to double down on the nerd.
Yeah.
So okay. I mean, I appreciate that, and obviously that's anecdotally that's interesting to hear that, and that's good if that is if people are starting to see that. I think that's powerful, and that's positive, because that's kind of where I wanted to go next, which was the research I did on the organization, which is pretty minimal. Like the camp I ended up in, which was like, all right, this is an organization that's exposing the wrongs of the left. That was just my total off the cuff generalization, right? And so then what I ended up, where I ended up going next was, I was like, dude, there's so much fucking noise out there right now, right? There's so much noise that's supporting the narratives of these political causes, right? So you made a great point around there's no voter fraud. You and I both know that there's fraud in everything. The question is how much fraud where it actually means anything, right?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably, at least if you look at the overwhelming data, the argument can be made that you're not going to sway an election in the United States from people going in double voting right now. That's at least what the data says, right? Now the word data doesn't mean anything anymore, because there's 25 versions of the data, depending on where I cherry pick it from. But I would say that we're not. What was that country in Russia that just had like massive voter fraud? We're not.
New Jersey.
Yeah. New Hampshire. Right. But, look, like we're a fairly, despite the political uprisings and all the bullshit we're doing right now, we're probably the most stable democracy in the world overall. Right. And we take that for granted. A lot of the noise we're having is us being the experiment of America.
Yes.
This is us putting our democracy to the test. And everyone says, "Oh, America's dying," and I'm like, "This is no. This is us testing the strength of our Constitution. This is us testing the strength of our democracy, and it may not be comfortable, but it's probably necessary." And so, and I don't love it, because I do think that we're a more divided country now than we've ever been, and there's a lot of data that supports that we're. And what's really funny though is, if you really look at the data, we probably have more transparency now than we've ever did. And the reality is, everyone was just asleep at the wheel, and they were okay with the wrongs because they didn't know about them, and there was no way for them to find out. So we were a happier, stupider culture, right? Like ignorance was bliss in the United States until it's become less bliss. And so, that being said, I don't believe that we will succeed as a country with more divisiveness. I think that is absolutely the wrong way for us to lead. And I'm going to say, forget about the United States. Let's just go to any organization. And if you told me, I got this great organization, 50% of the people disagree with each other, the other 50% hate the other side, and nothing ever gets done. Like literally nothing gets done. And they both have power to fuck each other constantly. And then my next question was, hey, how successful do you think that company is?
Yeah.
You would say Are they bankrupt? And I'd be like, oh yeah, totally bankrupt too. Like our debt
Yes.
our assets. Like, are they still in business? Oh, they're in business, but they're bankrupt and everyone can't agree. You would say that sounds like a really shitty place to go to work, right?
Yeah.
So, oh, by the way, I just described the United States of America right now. So one of my issues is with I guess anyone that's pushing a narrative, and I fully agree that there needs to be a check and balance around the truth, because you need to have the truth float to the top so that people can go back to center, right? This is why I believe core values don't need to be nice. This is why I believe in fully authentic core values, which is if people know what they're supposed to be or what they're agreeing to being a part of, then at least they can opt in or opt out, right? In a business. And that's why my book's all about that, right? So my question for you is if I believe, and I'm not saying you guys believe this, but Darius, who's a patriot. I know a lot of people don't like to say that because my last name. They'll be like, Mirshahzadeh, what country do you come from, boy? And I'm like, Anaheim? Oh, I'm Western Pennsylvanian and I'm Esfahanian Iranian, but mostly Anaheimian. And so, that being the case is like, I want our country to thrive. I want our country to build I want the moderates to have a voice, because we've lost our voice to the screaming right and left and the narratives of the right and left. And so I'll be transparent with you. I think that organizations like yours that are pushed, I think you're creating divisiveness in some ways, right? And
some people believe that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. When I looked, I just went to Wikipedia and I read a bunch of the things you guys have uncovered. And I'm like, it feels like you're creating divisiveness. So how does that help our country become better? If we have organizations like Project Veritas or competing organizations on the other side of the aisle or in the middle or on the right, whatever it is, right? I'll assume you guys are nonpartisan, right? So let's assume you guys are nonpartisan, although everyone may say you're not, or some may say you are. Let's say you're nonpartisan. If you're nonpartisan, how does exposing the truth create a stronger, like, unifying country?
Yeah, and I think this goes back to really kind of the whole idea of the founding of our nation and really what it was that our founding fathers wanted for our nation. They did not want, for example, an electorate that was illiterate and dumb and could not determine the difference between this candidate and that candidate for a specific thing. They wanted an informed electorate. It's the whole basis for our education system. It's the whole basis for civics in our society. And I think ultimately where Project Veritas fits in with that, and what gets me so excited about coming to work for an organization like this, is contributing to the education of the electorate, and making sure that the end goal here being, if we're talking specifically about the path forward for our nation and how our nation can ultimately make decisions that are in its best interest, the best interest of our nation is served when people actually know what their politicians stand for, not what they say they stand for, not the polish that somebody earning $1 million on a campaign has gone through and erased all the controversial stuff, but what do you really stand for? And that's exactly, I think, ultimately, Darius, where you talk about, for example, for lack of a better term, the death of moderation in American politics. I think that actually goes towards that. If you have, for example, a Senator McCaskill out of Missouri, who we investigated, who is all for assault weapon bans and let's increase gun control and everything like that. Project Veritas's stance on that is, we're not telling you whether that's good or bad. We're simply telling you what she believes. If she just came out and said, this is what I stand for, and maybe it's a radical left version of gun control, maybe it's, if it's a different politician, a radical right version of gun control, at least the voters can then decide, what, maybe I don't want that radical left version. Maybe I don't want that radical right version. Maybe I want something in between, and they can select the right candidate based upon that information. Without that information, a politician can simply just quite literally go around saying whatever it is they think that moderate group will vote for, and then go to Congress and do whatever it is they want, thinking that, quite rightfully so, by the way, that their electorate back home probably isn't paying attention. I would dare say a vast majority of Americans, even the ones that are most politically active, if you will, or politically in tune, and read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Atlantic and all these things on a daily, if not weekly basis, that even they don't know what it is their congressman or senator are doing every single day while they're in Washington. The politicians thrive off of that lack of information. And this is just what we're talking about on national politics. The death of journalism over the last 20 years has been an absolute travesty to the American voter when you start going on a local level. Just as an example, I would dare say that we're both from Orange County, that you would agree that, for example, the Orange County Register is a mere shadow of what it used to be 20 years ago, and it barely covers things that rise to the top in Orange County, let alone talking about, say, for example, whether or not the Orange City Council or the Irvine City Council is considering controversial measures or measures that its electorate, its population base would not agree with. Or even frankly, going even a step further, that's kind of basic information. Going a step further, doing investigative journalism to find out when this politician on the city council says, let's do this, are they being funded by a special interest group that is, again, helping to kill the moderate, base that most of America falls into. So I would say where Project Veritas, again, fills that gap and comes in to fill that gap and provide information to voters on things that they may not agree with. When you're talking about trying to get to a point where we end divisiveness, the best way we can end divisiveness is to stop electing divisive politicians. And the only way we can stop electing divisive politicians is if we know they're divisive to begin with, which frankly is exactly what we're trying to expose. We're trying to expose people that are in fact radical when they're pretending in the public sphere to be moderate.
But do you think, and I appreciate that, but my question for you, and this is where I'm kind of at a loss, is that it goes back to what I said earlier. People will do what's in their best interest based off the incentive systems we have in place, right? This is like, and I've seen this just when I'm designing the incentive systems in the businesses I've ran. I can completely change behavior based off of the incentives, the way I bake incentive systems. Yeah. So I was talking to a guest on the show about this, and we were talking about what's wrong with democracy right now is that the incentive. If I'm a politician in the United States, right? I'll use let's say a congressperson, right? If I'm running for Congress, I got to win, right? Like, why do it if you're not going to win, right? Like, I mean, one could argue like Trump probably didn't run for president to win, and then he won, right? Like there was a very low likelihood that he was going to win, but most people run because they want to win, right? I would assume all of them do to a certain degree. And so unless you're independently wealthy, I got to go raise money. So I got to promote, I got to make sure I get my supporters. And usually there's probably some wiggle room there because they got to, it's what, 83% of the time, the person with the most money wins. It's a pretty big number, right? You have like a 4 out of 5 chance of winning if you raise the most money. So there is something around who's better at raising money. And usually that involves special interest groups, right? Whether it's obvious or not obvious, whether it's a high net worth donor, whether it's a company, I don't know the specifics of how people raise money, but I'm assuming it's some version of they're getting money from someone that's not their own, right? And so I'm assuming that comes with them supporting the causes of those groups. Hopefully it's in line with their own, right? So let's just, for lack of argument, say it is supporting things they believe in. But that right there, I would say, is a broken incentive system right there, because I have to go raise money to then run for politicians. And now it's making capitalism control what our policies are, because capitalism is where money comes from. Money supports those politicians. Those politicians are going to support the needs of the people giving them the money, right? More than likely, because they want to get into office. Well, now I get into office. So I think that's a broken system. Like that's easy. Like that's super broken, in my opinion. Yeah. Because I have to go get money. Whoever gets the most money wins, and where they get it from will dictate more than likely the policies they promote, right? Absolutely. That's cronyism, dude, right? Like it is more than likely cronyism to at least 1% it is, right? Because I'm not going to go and start voting against the guy that just gave me money, more than likely, because I want him to give me more money in the future when I run again, right? Right. So that's a broken system. And then you go to the next part of it, which is, okay, now I'm in office for 2 years. 2 years in, they've been doing the votes to make sure they keep their constituents happy enough, right? Whether, to your point, they're asleep at the wheel back home or not, probably they've been over time, less so now because of the amount of news that's out there, and the win you get when you expose stuff, and then the eyeballs that click on the button when there's a hot article. And so now I got 2 years. I want to win again. So halfway into their job, they start working to get reelected. They're not doing their fucking job even then. They're barely doing their job. So I look at that and I'm like, dude, our incentive systems are so fucked. They're so broken. Yeah. Like I'm not empowering someone to come in and do what they believe in. I'm empowering them to come in, do what someone else believes in that may or may not align with their beliefs, and then keep doing it to stay there. Because now we get Nancy Pelosi, who's been there for 40 fucking years, right? Yeah. Where you're like, dude, that is a broken system, which then requires a group like you guys to come in, because everyone's disincentivized to tell the quote unquote truth, because they got to maintain their supporters. And so we have the foundation of all this is broken, and it's become exacerbated through technology. That's how I view it. Yeah. So I was reading this article the other day. I got into a kind of I don't want to say argument, but I got into a bit of a debate, if you will, with my father-in-law, who's a retired judge. And he's like about as left as you can get when it comes to politics, right? And I said, I don't believe CNN or Fox, because all they're trying to do is please the confirmation bias of their supporters. Right. Which, by the way, dude, I get to go online and talk to people about their beliefs. And I don't know if you saw this. I posted on Facebook. I said, you're a moderate when your right-wing friends call you a closet socialist, and your left-wing friends call you a closet Republican. Yes. By the way, I've been accused of both. So I know I'm moderate. I'm like, and by the way, if you're the one accusing it, you know where you stand. You're on the right or the left. Like that. Yes. Right. And so what I find is no matter what facts I throw at them, they'll say, that's not true. Here are my other facts. And then I'll say, well, where'd you get the funding? It doesn't matter. This is my truth. So you have this totally polarized world that's happening out there. And I guess where I'm going with all this, and what I wanted to ask you is, how can we, I feel like a Project Veritas doesn't necessarily fix the problem. I feel like it's bolted on, you are born out of necessity from a broken system.
That absolutely true. And I think if you look again, it's kind of been this conglomeration, the growth of corporate news, organizations, combined with, internet news, what have you. And as you put it, kind of this transparency that shows exactly what's going on behind the scenes there, that has led to a certain amount of the death of journalism. I had, as an example, in when I worked for a news organization in DC, knowing my own personal political bias, I made a very concerted effort whenever I would draft an article to interview only one person who kind of agreed with me and two people who disagreed with me, because I knew just the way that I would write the article would probably have some inherent bias in how I frame things. The problem is that, across the board, for the most part, journalists, they tend to focus on, across the board, they tend to focus on, gosh, I've got to get this particular story done. I've got to get that particular story done. They have this strategy, this story that they want to tell, and that's what comes first. I think if we backed up a little bit, to me, it's a travesty when you have a situation, which is exactly where we're at right now. It's a travesty. I've got to get going, by the way. Sorry, there's a legal emergency. But to me, it's a travesty when you have a situation where people rely on Twitter to get their news, because it is less biased and more raw than what you get off of CNN and Fox News and NBC. That to me tells us that those organizations are not doing their job, and it's very unfortunate. Hope is that with Project Veritas, get back to the normal, where people actually go and dig deeper than just what the press release says. That's ultimately my hope.
Cool, man. Well, I know you got to run. Thanks for joining us today. And thank you for supporting the book. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. Seriously, I'm sorry. You did not, for the record, I'm not being paid to do this. I have not been asked to do this, but guys, when this comes out, go get it. I've already, sped through probably about half of this book already, and it's phenomenal. Really, really well done, Darius. I'm excited. Thank you for hooking me up with some books on this. It's been a great great process to go through it.
Well, yeah, let's reconnect when you have time. I want to, after my book launch, and we can talk more about some of this fun stuff.
Awesome. Thank you, Darius. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. This was a really fun conversation. I appreciate it as well.
It was. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jered. Hey guys, we're wrapping up here. We got a couple more shows. You can bounce. I know you got to run. We got a couple more shows here today. So thank you for joining us. This was actually a first for us to bring on someone like Jered, and I thought that was a really cool talk. But yeah, join us. We got a couple more shows today. We got Randy Cohen this afternoon, and and I'm excited to have him talk. We call him Randy Lovebug, and we're going to talk about some business with him, his book, and a few other things. And I think we may even have another show on top of that. But guys, thank you so much for supporting. Follow us at The Real Darius M on Facebook. You'll get, when we go live, it'll shoot on your feed. You can go to www.therealdarius.com, sign up for our newsletter. That gives you a layout of what shows are coming up, our articles we're publishing. We're really trying to build a great following in there. I promise no spamming. I'm all about creating value. Last but not least, please go to YouTube at The Real Darius, and The Real Darius is our channel. Subscribe there. And then if you miss a show, you'll get updates through there as well. Anyway, great fun with Jered. Thank you guys so much for your time, and we'll be talking to you later on today. Peace.